Welcome, everyone. I'm Fritz Steiner, and I'm the Dean and Paley Professor here at the Stuart Weitzman School of Design. I'm very glad to see you all here tonight. And tonight's program marks the 5th anniversary of the Weitzman School Awards. And we're here to celebrate the recipients of the Kanter Tritsch Prize in Energy and Architectural Innovation and the Kanter Tritsch Medal in Architecture. So every year since 2018, we've come together to celebrate visionary work in architecture that's been done by a professional and also accomplishment of one of our students in order to build the next generation of architects. In 2019, we added a medal and a prize in city planning to the mix. And we celebrated those honorees right here just a few weeks ago. And you can watch that on YouTube. It's the Field Operations, which was the Witty Sakamoto Family Medalist in City and Regional Planning for their work in Baltimore on the Middle Branch. Our school's mission calls on us to tackle complex social and environmental issues and to advance the public good. This program takes up that work outside of our curriculum and research activities, creating a bridge between current students and graduates and between our students and professional practice. The Weitzman School Awards are made possible by the commitment of alumni and other supporters to shaping the future of the built world, a future that is more sustainable, more equitable, and more beautiful. And it's through the generosity of Lori Kanter Tritsch, a designer who earned her Master of Architecture degree here, and her partner, William Lauder, a Wharton graduate and Penn trustee, that we're here tonight. So now I'd like to introduce Rosanna Hugh, the Miller Professor and Chair of the Department of Architecture.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and thank you again for coming. Tonight, I want to introduce our recipient of the 2023 Kanter Tritsch Award, which is awarded annually to a second-year Master of Architecture student in the form of a $50,000 scholarship, which covers the bulk of tuition and fees in the final year of study. And this year, the Kanter Tritsch Award is going to Kan Nok Trong. So Kan comes to us from DeBary, Florida. He is an interdisciplinary creative with a deep interest in the relationship between space and human perception. I also found out that, like myself, he is a first-generation immigrant from Asia. His parents came to America, settled in Florida when he was just 6 months old. I came a little older, and that's why my English is not as good as Kan's. So I wonder if that unique interdisciplinary or intercultural experience allowed Kan to gain a different vision of the world since he's young, and exhibited in his work, like we see, its exceptional explorations of unexpected spatial conditions at the intersection of architecture and visual studies, which I think you will see in his work later. And they are always mixing mediums of sketching, drawing, and fabrication. Kan has worked in various areas related to community service and the built environment, collaborating with Penn Praxi, the Fresh Air Fund, and the Tom Wiscombe Architects. He also has ventured into fashion design, into collaborating with Hera Concept and contributing to the Penn Charity Fashion Show, where his team's work was featured at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And he also just told me a really fun fact that he has recently dabbled into DJing. So in case In case you want to hire him for your next party, he's volunteering. So Ken has gained numerous recognitions for his achievements at Weitzman in the very short time that he's been here, only a year and a half, with the E. Lewis Dales Traveling Fellowship, the Schenck Woodman Merit Scholarship, and tonight, the 2023 Kanter Tritsch Prize in Energy and Architecture Innovation. Now let's all learn a little bit more about Ken in this video that we're going to see.
I'm Kang Trung, and I am a third-year Master's of Architecture student at the Weitzman School of Design. Yeah, it's the biggest moment in my life. Growing up, my ambition always came initially from my parents and the way they always inspired me and pushed me to take advantage of the opportunities more than what they've ever had when they were here, first coming over to the States. My dad, he was a Vietnamese refugee, and he came over to the States when he was 23, so about the same age that I was when I was entering grad school. And I took that very seriously. I've always taken that seriously all my life, and that's the only thing that's been pushing me through the late nights. I just think back to why I was here in the first place, and it's always that, you know, my parents that always gave me the little nudge. In a perfect world, I would love to be just designing, to just make and fabricate and make beautiful things. But it's not just for myself, but it's to shift some greater global consciousness on what beauty is. I'm still trying to find a higher purpose for the things I make. And I think, like every instance that you enter a space, it's a painting. It's something that it's an art, you know. And every step you take, your perspective changes, you know, as you traverse through the building, and the depth changes. Like almost every instance is a painting, you know. It's like people see things at a glance, you know, and I think there's value in making something that stands out. I don't want to claim the title of artist. I do like the title of designer, because it's taking art and it's clarifying it towards a purpose. It's clarifying it towards like a functional purpose that people can interact with, people can have a use for, but also feel satisfied.
And I think since Ken honored his parents in the film, I also want to introduce that his parents are actually here tonight from all the way from Florida. Now, please come up and receive the award.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for attending tonight. It means a lot. It's an amazing honor to be recognized by a school that has changed the way I think. I want to thank Lori Kanter Tritsch again for this amazing scholarship. This scholarship will make an incredible impact on my future and the opportunities to come. I also want to thank the faculty that has put this event together, and it's an honor to win alongside KoningEizenberg. So congratulations to them.
Thank you.
Penn has been monumental in steering my design research, and I would like to thank my studio professors for their unique wisdoms and their invaluable mentorship. Dorian Booth, Ryan Palliter, Hannah Jamel, Nate Hume, Florence Pita, Ali Rahim. Thank you all for a rich, varied learning experience. I also want to thank my talented TAs for their patience and help in being so down to earth. Miguel Matos, Lauren Hunter, Ziqua Mo, Kyle Troyer, Katerina Marjanovic, Amy Wu. And I want to thank my friends here at Penn, Alexa Rojas, my first friend here at Penn, who has survived the trials and tribulations with me of first year. Thank you so much for your awesome energy and your much needed water checks. Sophie Wojtulewicz, the only person who knew how to close the most impossible poly surfaces. You have this relentless determination to solve any problem that comes your way, as well as the kindness that helps solve mine as well, both in Rhino and in real life. So for that, I'm incredibly grateful to be your friend. Francisco Naya, a man's man, someone who knew how to make any serious moment funny within reason. Thank you for being a light spirit and reminding me of the joys in the simple things. Grace Infante, so incredibly talented. Your artistry and ambition is so inspiring. It's been so great to have grown as a designer alongside you as your friend. Roxanne Zhou, the person I can talk through and about anything. Thank you for your understanding, the insightful conversations, and being an emotional rock. Ying Chen, the person that's never been afraid to tell it to me straight, to tell me the truth that I need to hear, but doing so with the biggest heart imaginable. Thank you, Ying. And last but not least, Marjorie Tello Wong. After working on numerous projects together, it's safe to say we've grown together more than just collaborators, but you've grown to be one of my most valuable friends. So thank you. And of course, my parents, after leaving a country for a better life, gave me the opportunity to create a life for myself. I hope this award shows I haven't squandered this opportunity. So please, give a big round of applause to my parents. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really touching. You know, it's never easy to select out of so many strong work portfolios that we receive to give just one award. So we actually tonight want to honor another student who received the honorable mention. Please stand for us to recognize you, Danny Jarabek. So thank you, everyone. Now I'd like to ask Fritz to come to the mic.
Thank you, Rosanna. Congratulations, Cheng. Congratulations, Danny. The Weitzman School Awards were established to celebrate individuals and organizations who have embraced the biggest challenges of the built environment. The Kanter Tritsch Medal in Architecture in particular honors an architect or a firm that has changed the course of design history with particular foci in the areas of energy conservation, environmental quality, and/or diversity. These three aspirations have guided us in our review of the nominees for the past 5 years, but they really boil down to one word, community. The word is one that you hear often in relationship to tonight's honoree. The 2023 Kanter Tritsch Medalist KoningEizenberg Architects. Opened in 1981 by Hank Koning and Julie Eizenberg, the Santa Monica-based practice made its name embracing overlooked affordable housing and community projects. Hank and Julie were eventually joined in practice by principals Brian Lane and Nathan Bishop, who share their ambition for environmentally and socially sustainable design. They're a small firm, but as they say in boxing, they punch way above their belt.
We punch a lot.
Critics describe their work as artful, upbeat, joyful, innovative, smart, generous, and emphatic. The firm's 2006 monograph, Architecture Isn't Just for Special Occasions, highlights the value of social engagement. Consider the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, a 2005 project that connected two historic landmarks, the 1890s post office and the 1940s planetarium, to create a focal point for a historically underserved low-income neighborhood. The design was so successful that they were invited back to restore a third building an abandoned 400 square foot Romanesque revival library that was commissioned originally by Andrew Carnegie, one of his 1,600 free libraries across the country. Of course, here in Philadelphia, we know something about free libraries since Benjamin Franklin started the free libraries here in Philadelphia. Today, thanks to KoningEizenberg and their clients, Pittsburgh has the largest cultural campus for families in the United States. Or consider their 28th Street apartments in Los Angeles, designed by the renowned African-American architect Paul Revere Williams for the YMCA. This Spanish colonial gem had fallen into disrepair. Drawing on historical documents, KoningEizenberg renewed the building with solar panels, seismic upgrades, and a new residential wing that combines youth training and employment programs, as well as supportive housing. So we're very excited to have KoningEizenberg's founding principal, Julie Eizenberg, as well as Principal Brian Lane here tonight. Julie, Brian, might you join me?
Come on. His birthday got him out of speaking tonight, because happy birthday, Brian, but it doesn't get out of coming up with us.
Thank you. I'll let you take it on.
We'll do it.
There you go.
Yeah, it's my privilege to present you with the 2023, actually.
Yeah, I know, we're late.
We're still in sort of post-pandemic. What year is it?
Yeah,
Kanter Tritsch Medal.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
You take the
All right,
certificate.
I'll take that.
A little bit more about Julie.
Uh-oh.
She
Yeah,
is
take
a
that.
fellow of the Australian Academy of Architects and has been recognized with the AIA Los Angeles Gold Medal, the Australian Institute of Architects Gold Medal, and an American Academy of Arts and Letters Award. In 2022, she was inducted into the National Academy of Design. Julie, I'll turn the podium over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi. It's been really great to be at the school today, and you guys are a little bit intimidating, but I will try and outdo you, okay? War is on. It's 40 plus years since I left school, 30 since Brian was on campus here. I wish I was where you are now, hence the clock. It does run fast. Congratulations, King, again. It's great. And you two over there, whose name I've already forgotten. You guys do wonderful work. I saw more of their work today than showed up here, and it's astounding. So anyhow, we're here to sort of talk about what we do. So we're pretty well, community sort of sums it up. We do people places. So I thought I'd sort of talk about architecture as a social medium. And to do that, we learned early on that to make inclusive places, we need to develop trust, offer a sense of ease, and deal with fit relative to place and with people. What does that mean? These days, we are often asked to translate these values into physical strategies. So here is the beginning of a toolkit. Now you've got to check that I use it. There's a kind of a game coming up. You've got to find the strategies. So community engagement, I mean, not everything is about what is built. A lot is to do with how we communicate with others. Individual empowerment builds trust. It makes people feel in charge of the place that they're in. Ease, we feel that informality and making a personal connection is key. And social and physical resonance is about fit. It's not about fitting in. So what does, so we'll sort of go through it. The toolkit. So we started with individual empowerment. So transparent is the big one architects will need to use or like to use. I do too, we do too. Choice. When you give people the opportunity to choose, even if it's between one kind of seating and another, you've given them a certain sense of a control over their environment. That helps to build trust. If a place is active and feels occupied, even it's a place where you can make a mess, it means that you're welcome there too. And discovery. which isn't contradictory to transparency. But when you discover something, it gives you a certain kind of agency that it's you that found something out. Informality, I always use the genes because it crosses over any income group or ethnic group. And it's the idea of a loose fit, that it doesn't have to be perfect. And actually, imperfection is to a certain extent really interesting. If you've worked on as many budget projects as we have, it becomes a tool for design, trust me. Materials, they can be modest. We're not trying, in the idea of building community, it's not about impressing people with the power of something. It's about inviting them in and feeling that they can be there. Daylight, it's about the only thing I can prove really does anything, because the scientists have now said it makes you feel better. And flow, that you feel that you can move through a space and that the barriers to entry aren't set up. And then make it personal, not generic. Experimental means that it's not generic. So that sort of puts us, for the last 40 years or so, always trying to do something that explores something new each time we get to something. And that's something that you guys do in school because you're pushed to it. Keeping it up in practice, as those of you in practice know, that's hard work, but very fulfilling. Allow for the temporal, the things that, the flags that go up, you know, the St. Patrick's Day shamrocks. Architects are afraid of them, but you shouldn't be. And you need to do craft. If you make it that you made it, people see that. And what I see in this school is an extraordinary craft in terms of the delivery of the projects and the representations I've seen today. If I was here a week, I don't know what I'd do. It'd be really intimidating, go home and hide in a corner. Toolkit also has social and physical resonance. So we've always looked at ways, we call it sort of sticky spaces, I think other people do too. So if you do something that benefits residents, for example, in a housing project, it should benefit the neighborhood as well. And open-ended narrative. This is tricky. In a time where each group has been traumatized in some way and undervalued, how do you make something that delivers a message that it's not just one person's thing, it's lots of things, and lots of people have to feel comfortable in a space. And that's an interesting conversation. And then sustainability. So that's why the Nolly map is round. I mean, the planet is the whole planet. You can't do something locally without impacting globally. So the whole idea of place and control is changing. Okay, so this is where we get to the game. You've got to find, like, who did the Chinatown game upstairs? There's people from that studio. This is another game. You've got to see if I actually get to talk about the things I said, because I often forget and go off on a tangent on something that was annoying at the time or a surprise at the time. So see if I get there. So this is Pico Branch Library, and it's in a park in Santa Monica, which was sort of basically run by gangs. And we changed that park with a landscape architect working together about 10 years earlier than this project. They asked us back. Good sign. The first park was designed under a public community process, and so was the library. And they were bossy folk, but good folk. And they came up with the idea, as we stressed about this idea of ownership of the library. Was it the Hispanic community? Was it the African American community? Was it the Japanese community who were there before them, who are no longer in that neighborhood? And so between them all, they came up with this idea of a community living room, not a new concept, but a concept that really suited well to the situation. They told us we could add the library, but we couldn't take any green space. And we needed to maintain the path that went north-south that joined the multifamily neighborhood with the single-family neighborhood below. And there's a community process. This makes it look like it was all happy. These processes are an interaction. It's really fun to think with people. And we always think of that community process as kind of a springboard for innovation, because they push you to do things that you weren't actually comfortable thinking to do. And that means you do something better, most of the time. It's a simple plan, and then this gets where strategy and architecture or form collide. The whole project nearly fell apart because they couldn't do a 2-story building because the elevator pushed the project cost up too much. We couldn't cross that north-south axis. Can you see it? Yeah. If my cursor's there, you can see it, right? My cursor? Maybe, maybe not. And they needed a community room, and we couldn't fit it in without taking up green space. And the librarians were kind of worried about this because they wanted the community room and they were not comfortable that it was detached from the main building. And we couldn't work out what the problem was. So we went sideways, and going sideways, we found out that they had a revenue generation, small as it was, from people renting out that community room. Sounds really trivial, but once we worked that out, we could then talk to the Parks and Rec people and explain the situation. So once the library had control of the space, they were comfortable then with it moving across to the west. So that was how we pulled it off. We also pulled it off, I guess, by unifying the project with the canopy, which is with the photovoltaics above. And there's a whole bunch of sustainable strategies in here. And mostly what we were doing was trying to understand how we could use light. Because one of the problems with us, all us architects, this is a lead platinum, I think, talking about transparency is, if you don't have light behind glass, you can't see through the glass. That's why it works so nicely at night, but there's daytime too. And we all draw these pictures of being able to see through the glass, and you can't. So you have to bring in light. So that was why the roof form was incredibly important, so that we could bring in light from the north so that there was light within the library. Now, this problem is exacerbated by modern glass because of energy code, because generally they want you to have a coefficient of shade sort of quality to it, and that means they want you to tint it. So that makes it even harder. Now, there are really fancy glasses, but on cheap projects, you don't get to use the really fancy glass. And you can sort of see how this plays out. And then we play with texture, and the project architect on this guy and my design principal partner, Nathan Bishop, led this design. And you can see how pattern on pattern is so cheap and easy to get, and it's a loose fit. Have I used all the words yet? And then there's a sort of temporal. So in this case, we tried to suggest that with the fabric pieces, not so perfectly secured, a little soft and saggy, but it was about the farmer's market that came every Saturday. And if I'm lucky, it's not the right picture, you'll have to wait for it. Because one of the things we've learned about making community is having the more things that bump into each other, it suits the way people go about their social life. So there's something that happens with the kids, then they may go into the library for 20 minutes or half an hour. Then they may go to the farmer's market, they may do a pickup basketball. It's not about the retreat library of the past. The broken ceiling like that helped distribute the light. It also helped with the sound. And there's a sound insulated plaster on that ceiling. And you can sort of see the connection out, which is great. Oh, there's the farmer's market. I should have moved it forward. It's stuck back, that's what happens. If you're not looking, these slides, they move around. And you can see that connection is strong. And then when that started to happen at the beginning of the library, the people from the farmer's market and the library were trying to get together about how they could build programs about that kind of interaction. And I have pretty pictures. And you can see and then this thing sort of slides into the green fields, which the community very cleverly sized so that you couldn't do formal soccer games. Because once it was formal soccer games, the leagues took it over and you couldn't use it for informal activity. So they're having fun there. And I can move to the next project, which has informal issues of another kind. So I don't know if you guys have been following the situation in LA, but the unhoused issue is huge. Brian in our office has been leading it for, I don't know how he does it, our efforts in housing for the longest time, and where it's, for some, it's just about, there's an opportunity for form. For Brian, it's also about how durable it is. How's it going to be there in 20 years? I mean, that's what you get. I say nice things about you if you don't come up and talk about your own project. So anyway, so what we're looking at is homeless encampments in front of the building we designed in Skid Row. And the homeless encampments are there because it takes so long to get these buildings finished out, and it takes so long to get signed up to get in. And we cannot keep pace in LA or in the region or in California with the demand. So this is the building, and this is built about an idea of wellness and garden. There's very little green space in downtown LA, and on Skid Row, even less. Then we can tell you about Brian's fight with the city to get extra trees on the street, which we were going to pay for, to make the impact greater, to amplify it. That's enough about you, Brian. You don't get, that's it. So the garden courtyard goes up. So what does it feel like? This is a phrase we've used for many years, is how does it feel to come home? So yes, you need a secure entry and you need a big wall on Skid Row, but it can feel like it's a small hotel. There's no reason, it doesn't cost you any more. You put an arbor, I mean, there's plants growing across here now. The manager's office is just there, so he sees everything that's coming and going. So you've got eyes on the street and you've got a sense of homecoming, and you come into a courtyard. And then you can move through the courtyard and up, as this young woman is doing very nicely. And then you can see how it's starting to cascade that yard and amplify each planting move that's made. It's filled in so much. It's kind of cool. But it's a tough environment down there. So we had loose furniture. There are issues now with fentanyl and other drugs where behavior is becoming increasingly erratic with many people in this population. And there's no longer loose furniture because it was thrown over the balcony. So we just want to give you the severity of the issues that these folks are dealing with. Not to say that anyone's doing a bad job, it's just that the problem is escalating. So you can see how that plan plays out. Simple spaces that each of the tenants gets, community spaces, including a laundry, which is placed so that on the second floor in this case, to sort of create a sort of a higher intensity use for sort of recreation and socialization. The exterior stair and the way you move around to create more opportunity for people to interact with each other without sort of having to go to a formal group and say your name with a name tag. All of those kind of things are thought about. On the ground floor of services, because as you probably already know, the attrition of going back onto the street with when you add in social services and other kinds of support systems really makes a difference. And then the city, so we're trying to build these things as cheap as we can, and the city is saying, well, you need to comply with the guidelines for this district, which is meant to have retail all along the front. And it's also meant to have a certain amount of articulation. So what was great about that was that we get to sort of pinch and pull the stucco facade, but we had to spend a lot of time making an argument that a courtyard was as valuable as a retail storefront that would be vacant, for sure, in this location. So now we go to Chicago. And I don't know if you knew the ex-planner for the city of Chicago, commissioner was Maurice Cox. A number of you should know him. So he, under the mayor, the previous mayor, I've lost her name, I'm so sorry. They wanted to invest back in the disinvested south and west sides of Chicago. And they came up with these competition programs, and which put together architects and developers who then competed for the right to develop land that the city owned. So you all know the story of disinvestment in Chicago in the south and west side. So we entered one of those competitions, and it's called Woodlawn Social. And it's located south of the University of Chicago on East 63rd, that sort of center pink spot, and then the 15-minute walk zone, which is what Maurice was trying to implement every time that he was trying to collect an impact. In this case, took in some transportation and some development along some of the streets that was happening, and it's close to the Obama Library, which you see on the far right. So this was meant to be an investment. What they asked for was a catalytic development that would encourage restaurants to locate here, would create community space, would provide affordable housing, and would also provide for sale housing if you could do it. Now, the thing is, no one had done it along these commercial blocks because they hadn't looked at the funding strategy. And I can come back to that. So these are the lots that the city owned. Well, you know the city owned the lots because people didn't pay their property tax and they fell back to the city. This is not like some active program where they said, hey, I'll buy those lots, they look great. So those were the lots. We were asked to choose between lot 1 and 2. The other ones were going to come as a second phase for another competition. And we chose lot 2. And lot 2 in the winter looks like this, which is pretty ordinary. But through the magic of our rendering, which is nearly as good as the studio rendering, we can make it summer. There, see? Now, the interesting part of what we did was we adopted this sticky space strategy we've been using in LA. And every time I go east, I get told, well, you don't understand the weather or whatever. Whatever you do in LA will never apply here. Yeah. But I tell people I buy gloves. It works. It works. But the issue here was by flipping the buildings from running along the street, which was the conventional commercial corridor thing to do, where you make a block, we flipped them. In LA, it works really well for the breezes. Here, it works really well because it allows sunlight onto the boulevard because otherwise we would be blocking it. So that adds warmth. It also meant we could divide the building in a way that was a cohesive whole, but have an independent piece of it that made sense, which was the for sale housing. So the deal is that you can't easily fund a project that has a mix of for sale and rental housing in a single building. So that was how that went, but it had, extra benefits, which I'll probably go over as I move through. But so this shows the diagram of sort of how we were thinking about it at the top part of the slide. And then below you can see how it fits with what the remaining blocks could be developed. That was the developable area given by the city. This is kind of what it sort of generated in terms of a public space. We really didn't need a lot of retail, and our developer partner didn't want a lot of retail because it's hard to rent. So what we did was we had larger storefront, shallower units. So it's still going to be a push uphill to make this happen because we all know retail is difficult at this point in time. And then they asked us, because doing a competition for very little money isn't enough, could you suggest some ideas for another lot that we have, or for the street as a whole? We came up with the idea that Site 4, which was across the street, could host a cultural institution. We actually didn't think they had enough on its own, just one block, to develop, to create enough of a catalyst. So we were recommending this sort of second spot. And we were recommending that it have a cultural institution, some more open space, parking, which could convert to apartments if they were built as flat floor parking space in the future. But because there was also a lot of fear that people didn't want to park too far from where the retail was, and that was discouraging restaurant people from wanting to sign on for a lease agreement and things like that, or expressing any interest. Once you'd done that, that meant sites 1, 3, 5, and 6 could develop in a more conventional way without the kind of restrictions and need for parking. City of Chicago is advanced on the parking front. They really were not requiring any cars, but doesn't quite work yet because the neighborhood is in transition. It will, but not right now. How that sort of plays out in the diagram of it, and then the sort of that street view that takes that sort of idea of bringing the residential streets to the boulevard rather than the boulevard blocking the residential streets. We didn't get into the first round of funding, but we're optimistic for the future. So this is the Children's Museum site that Fritz talked about. So when we won this competition, which was won in 1999, this is what was happening on the north side of Pittsburgh. The Children's Museum of Pittsburgh were in the little old post office. The Buell Planetarium was shuttered. The Allegheny Center, which was offices over a vacant mall. The Carnegie Library was partially occupied, and the Hazlitt Theater was shuttered. And it was a pretty scary sort of zone to walk through. The Children's Museum believed that when you make places for kids and families, you can turn neighborhoods around. And we had an incredible group of people we were working with. So in 2004, this was completed. That sort of glassy bit is, we did an art piece with Ned Kahn and using it as a shade structure for the glass, and they flap in the wind. So you get to see like wind paths as you would see when the wind crosses over water. So in 2019, we completed, did we finish it in 2019? I'm just so confused with COVID that who knows? Yeah, I think it was 2019. We finished the museum lab. The Children's Museum was occupied. The museum lab was occupied. The Children's Park was developed. Andrea Cochran designed that. And they're now back up to exceeding their pre-COVID numbers at 320,000 visitors a year. So let's talk about Museum Lab. And yep, we're going to have Ben Franklin and Andrew Carnegie in the room to sort of sort out this library argument. But this is meant to be the first one that was built, although there's always arguing with historians for sure. What happened was that the Children's Museum ran out of space in their museum to serve teens well. Plus, they knew that teens don't like to be with the little kids. So they looked for a way to do teen programming, and they took over this building. So it's kind of like if Carnegie was looking for a leg up for the public by using knowledge and books, the Children's Museum were looking for a leg up about 21st century skills, about making, about engineering, about art and creative uses. So there's the Carnegie Free Library in 1890. It got hit by lightning in 2006, which more or less did it in for good. It had been remodeled a number of times and was in very poor shape inside. It's a National Historic Register building on the outside, but not on the inside. And it has, similar to this building, I think it had, has struts. The stacks were separate from the reading rooms because the books were precious and you wanted to keep them under lock and key. You went to a front desk, you requested your book, and then you went down and you sat sedately somewhere and you read it. And it improved you and your life was better. So when you get these kind of buildings that are completely not accessible, anyone had this problem when they've worked on a building around here? The first thing you start at is how to do universal access or how to do accessibility, which means where do you put the elevator? So the elevator located here connected a bunch of different floors. It had half-level differences, full-level differences, and that elevator sort of organized things. So we didn't add much space. We filled in one set of structural stacks on the first floor. And then on the second floor, the gathering space filled in a light well above a Tiffany glass ceiling that had been removed years ago. And I'll show you how that works. And then that elevator then connected also the mezzanine above. Now, we could have done a smaller amount of connection, built less on that second floor, but what it did was it gave us this bonus gathering space. So what I want to put into your mind is, especially as you deal with the formal, that sometimes the pragmatic and the practical actually open up more opportunities than they take away. And to stop thinking about these things as impediments to you doing the most beautiful buildings in the world. So that's sort of a lesson I've learned, and I don't think I believed it at the beginning either, but it really works. Change the the lens. So you can see where we added the addition. Oh, what I am showing you back there is the condition of the building. Oh, that's the next slide, sorry. It's pretty nice. Yep. Carpet on the walls, nothing about the ceiling, the Tiffany ceiling was there. This is what we were hoping to find some of as we pulled out the improvements from the 60s. Now, they couldn't start the discovery. One of the things I would say is a rule of doing these buildings, the more discovery you can do before you get started, the safer your budget is. Because what we got to was this. To get to a stable surface, you took nearly everything away. Because what happens is, between that drywall and that wall, you've basically created a humid little container that helps eat away at the cement. So none of the plaster stayed on. So then we looked at it. And we looked at it, and we looked at it, and we thought, well, you know what? It's really quite poetic. And it's actually a better kind of setting for the teens because it's got a little more risk to it. Because what was worrying about us is how polite a restored historic building can be. And then you get to see Andrew Carnegie, who made his money out of steel. Those were the kind of amateurs that were making these kind of buildings possible. Friedland Buck did an installation. It was a sort of a coordinated effort. We got all of the mechanical systems hiding behind that, and we brought light in from the side instead of from the middle. And you can see, we then got to this point, well, wait a minute, so we called this the reveal. When you took it back, it was to the reveal to the truth. Then we had to sort of make some fake restoration because otherwise we didn't have enough to be able to accommodate on the right side. That wall's an exterior wall, and we needed to get more thermal performance out of that wall. And we found a product that's a thermal plaster, but there is no way we could make it back to the brick and have the thermal plaster. So we sort of made this cut line and said, this is the fake restoration, and this is, you know, down to your shorts. And I sort of walked you through the spaces, the kind of programs they're doing. They're doing some really inventive stuff. And their premise has always been that you don't design it for kids with the idea that kids aren't as smart as adults. You design it as a space that is appealing to all. And you can see the second floor and the sort of conditions we were working with. What you're seeing where it says lobby lounge was they built toilets that covered up this window and had covered up the ceiling below that. I could go on about this for too long, so I'll stop. So the lobby lounge. To the left is a charter school, which was part of one of the sets of people they brought into the building so that they could see if they could get education to move between the museum setting, which is much more informal learning, and the more structured learning of an institutional school setting. And that's one of the classrooms in there. That's in the addition. How that space kind of works, and sort of walking you back out through the building. So the last project I want to show you is where I grew up in Australia, in that little red dot that's Melbourne. Sometimes I'm homesick. Well, someone's going to ask me sooner or later, are you homesick? And we're in Wurundjeri country. The Australians have been much more active than the US, and the US is beginning to be in recognizing indigenous populations. And this was part of the reconciliation, diversity, and inclusion things that was very important in the framing of this project at all. So it starts with this idea of the student precinct. The University of Melbourne's a commuter school with 50,000 plus students. It's got a very good reputation as a research university. I can show you where I lived when I was a student, if you want. It's just up here. But anyhow, it has had terrible stuff for day students coming onto campus. It never had much of anything. And they needed to remedy this because it was beginning to impact their draw around the world because they had a lot of international students. And the student precinct is about 225,000 square feet, located roughly here. And it was all to do student serving services to do with arts, culture, informal study space, all of the things that could build community among students. The other issue that they were worried about, and we've been seeing more of it everywhere on campuses, is the sense of isolation that students were feeling that was causing an increased number of student suicides, which is devastating. So there's the site. We only really got rid of one building, which is the long one in the foreground. Oh, and another little small one, which I'll show you. So this was undertaken, they had done all the student engagement before we even got there, which was great, but there was still more to happen through the process. And they worked out what the students wanted. They also wanted to make a stand on diversity, and so they had what they called the diversity procurement method, and that involved Lyons as the executive architect getting someone from overseas, which was us. I think that was a ring. I don't know how they qualified on that one. They brought in someone who had an incredible reputation in historic preservation work, sustainability, an Indigenous architect, Greenaway and Associates, and all of us worked together on the master plan. And then we went on to design the buildings and do the construction documents as we parsed up the project for each of the firms, which is a slightly different model than you usually see where the executive architect does the documents and construction on a project. Those were the buildings that were removed because the idea here was to keep as much as possible. As I was reminded the other day, the less you build, the more you're doing for the planet. Did I get that right, Erin? Yeah. So you're not going to add to your farmhouse and make it 6,000 square feet? No, okay. But then the idea was, and this is what the whole team came up with, was if we could sort of use the landscape as a unifying factor, because what we were doing was saying that it's cool to be different in all of the buildings and we can keep as many of them as we can. So that was the opportunity to reinstate pre-colonial landscape, to get the grades moving through, to sort of notate where the eel ponds were for fishing, all of those kind of strategies that rebuilt a sense of identity and pride for the Aboriginal students. So this kind of tells you sort of how the master plan and program played out. And we got the student pavilion, partly because it was a new building and we were working from far away. And then there was 225,000 square feet. And there's the student pavilion completed. And just to give you a context of how the transportation works there was a tram stop adjacent. The building to the left of the student pavilion with the nice bright pink star on it was already there, and it was the Maya Asia building, which was housed a collection of artifacts from Asia. I guess that seems self-evident. It's like, we need a drink. They didn't give us a drink in advance. That's what I'm going to blame it on. And the students call it the PAV. Now, the PAV here just sounds like a contraction. The PAV there is a dessert that's like the national dish. And when they called it the PAV, we knew they loved the place. So the program sort of starts like this. It's food on the ground floor, a sandwich of a recreational library, an informal study space, an event and study space on the roof. And this is where we got to play out a lot of the ideas that I talked about earlier and have been moving through the work systematically about how you make people feel included and welcome. The structure was part of that because the dancing columns inside is not something you see from one direction, only from the other. So you find that, maybe you don't find that. That's okay. But it's there if you need it. And it adds a little bit, there's also a tie-in with the brutalist tradition on that campus, which is another long story. And then we just played with the skin about how much glass we could get for the budget we had and still meet the energy goals, which were pretty high for the project. And that was sort of in construction and then built. So along with the students' issue of making it feel like I can go there and it's mine, they were very interested in sustainability, and that's sustainably harvested blackbutt wood, which is a native Australian wood. Some of the delight of this building are these fine mesh stainless steel screens, which were actually a response to how do you make an enclosure that's 1.5 meters high, which is the requirement on campuses in Australia because of the issue of people wanting to toss themselves off buildings without it feeling like you're being imprisoned. And this was the first building that created outdoor spaces for students on upper floors. That was specifically made for students, not for faculty. And as you sort of move closer, you see how the impact of the wiggly columns. It's not just our, I mean, we'll borrow from anyone, and people can tell me later where we borrowed that from. And the kind of outside edge and idea that you're welcome, that there's stuff happening here. None of this is rocket science. I mean, what it is it's just to remember to do it. And sometimes we forget as we have a really strong formal idea, and we say we can't do both. And I challenge you, I think you can. So then there was the big sort of, I guess, the homage to Venturi Scott Brown. If you want to make people feel like they're welcome, do something that says, where's the sign that I'm welcome? It's the outside stair that says you can go anywhere here. Inside in the dining hall, which stays open when the kiosks are shut. And the idea here is that all space in this building is available for students to use for informal study when it's not being used for something else. And that doubling of purpose meant that you got doubly, really, the square footage use out of something which would normally have been set aside as single purpose spaces. And I'll go into that in a second. It's mixed mode on the sort of the student floors at the top and the bottom, and then the conditioned space for more thermal comfort in the middle. The plans, I know you guys do nice plans, actually. That surprised me. I've been around the country, not that many people do plans. I love plans. I won't bore you with a walk through these, but I do like them because that's my generation's way of thinking through how things get together, that in the section. Again, you can see how the sort of stair starts to move and connect across on upper floors with the other buildings. The idea that a space should be active, somewhere you can make a mess. You can't get too precious on a student place if you are going to worry about the conditions up. So again, furniture will not last forever. I mean, I think you're probably turning around furniture every 5 years. You're kidding yourself if you're not. But each time you do it, you can choose the furniture that makes people feel like they're in charge of the space and provides them with opportunities and choice of where they sit and how they sit and how they have social interaction with their friends. Sort of trying to point out some of the connections there, some of the formal issues we came about how to attach the curtain wall to the structure, how to achieve the acoustic comfort that was needed in there as well. The skylight to the top floor. The instruction in the recreational library of not to study. And then there's something that's quite interesting. The event floor, which had kitchens because there were events, was also there for open study. Now, we did this slightly as an experiment to sort of how could we make that space work as study space? And the interesting part is it's informal and it has a domestic read. And that actually appeals to a lot of students because it feels like you're not in an institutional setting. And that's become very popular space. And then out onto the roof. And then it's not just about making the big spaces. We know how to make big spaces for students to gather, but they also need small spaces to gather. And finally, you're starting to see that new landscape that's coming down to the south, starting to grow in. And this is where I say goodbye and thank you. And we've had a great day here, Brian and I, and we look forward to having a drink with you and a snack after. Thanks. Oh, any questions?
Have a question or two?
Yeah, I'm willing. Don't make them too hard. I can do it.
So we have a microphone, so just raise your hand, come around with it.
Nothing? Okay.
Navigate, you mentioned climate when you come east.
Yeah.
People say, how do you, where's your starting point on navigating the climate of where you're at? Be Pittsburgh or Southern California or Melbourne?
That's a really good question. Common sense, orientation, understanding how cold it gets, how hot it gets, and where the breeze is coming from, where the sunshine's coming from in the winter, sort of. I mean, if you do the simple stuff first, the amount of gadgets you need to sort of trick it out to make it happen gets less. The other thing we're learning is about the assembly of the walls that we're making. We have to be more careful about that. We learned that particularly through that adaptive reuse we showed you of the museum, is that you've got to make wall assemblies that really work, and the fewer materials in those wall assemblies, the better. So we're learning about this stuff, but it's not rocket science that people want to be warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Prevailing breezes is a really big deal in hotter climates. And it cuts down also humidity and shade. I know people, we've done some projects in Pittsburgh. I've done some projects in New York. I actually did one on Shelter Island. And everyone thinks of New York as being really cold and you're planning for the winter. But on these places, you have to plan for shade. Because there is a summer. You're actually in New York on the same latitude as Rome. So get with it, kids. It gets hot. And shade is really important. So that is another sort of aspect that we take into consideration as we're trying to make comfortable places that work in the winter and work in the summer.
Well, if there's, now, question here and a question there.
Thank you. Really delightful. You make it look, I'm not going to say easy, but you communicate your project in such a way that makes it look like it was seamless. And I can only imagine that project, all of the projects.
You're making me laugh, but go ahead.
Hence.
Yeah, no, I'm just
and
thinking of Brian's 3 trees on the street, and 6 months arguing with street trees to get them. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the enthusiasm which you make it look
yeah.
like.
Because I don't want people to be discouraged by it. I mean, I think there's a general perception that if you're doing work that's for the community good, there's firstly nothing formal to think about, and secondly, there's no joy in it. You're doing it because you're coming from some high moral ground that you're doing community good. This is just people who are nice people who should have nice things like everybody else. So if you start from that premise, that's fine. So the issues that you're worrying about that are formal are as important for working with the community at large as they are for people with means. And so, it isn't, I mean, everybody complains about the work. I can't think of any architect working in any milieu who isn't complaining about something, because we're good at it. But the real truth is that this work gives incredible satisfaction when you see it working. And we love the experimentation and the exploration that gets us to open new doors. I mean, that's kind of, I guess, why you gave us this award, because we've persistently tried to open doors about what you can do in an area where people said you couldn't do that.
So, perfect. So hence my question is, could you offer us some of your strategies that you've learned over the years that really help us open those doors, particularly with individuals who may not be the clients themselves, but are the funders for these projects?
We don't really design for the funders. We design for the end users, because that's kind of what a community project really has in mind. That doesn't mean you ignore the funders, because the funders, if you don't have the funders, you don't get it there. What are the lessons, Brian? Your turn. Help me. I think it's some of the things that Brian's copped onto. It's not just getting it to look good on day one. It's how do you keep it working as time goes on. This issue of aging and weathering is huge. And if you saw this dismantling of one really revolutionary affordable housing provider in LA that we'd worked with for 40 years, and Michael Molzan had worked with, and other architects who have broken boundaries on what you can do in this area, because they couldn't keep up with the maintenance on the buildings. And it was heartbreaking. And we're seeing a lot of issues with how that is going to play out. We don't really know.
I'll just add one thing. So
Good.
I think we have the firm itself was. We have a set of values, and I think those values kind of run throughout almost. And they're about the community, about ways to community aspects of the building, just activity. So I think that's something that values
And if they don't, we beat them.
you know, yeah.
We have one more question in the back.
It's wonderful. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the project, the competition in South Chicago, South side of Chicago. I'm particularly interested because Philadelphia might be going through a process of disposing of public land. We have a land bank here that's kind of opaque, and there are lots of people who want to create a more efficient, transparent process for disposing of city-owned land. And I was thinking maybe we need a competition here. Can you talk about the experience you had with it's from the neighborhood and political process?
So the political process was put in place before we were asked to compete on the competition. And Maurice and the planning department had done a lot of community engagement. The developers who are interested in this kind of work also know that community engagement is necessary if they're going to trust you. So they've already established that. It's kind of strange to say, but it was one of the places where we needed to do the least community engagement. Because what Maurice was trying to do by opening up these competitions, not just in Chicago, but this was nationally, was to try and bring in new ideas to Chicago. Not that the Chicago architects weren't doing a great job, but he thought, well, you know, maybe there's more out there that's worth looking at. So I'm not sure from a neighborhood point of view that, you know, a gal from Australia living in California was their dream idea of an architect. Let's be straight about this. But we worked with two developers who understood that neighborhood, and the other teams were similar. Our neighborhood was a young entrepreneur developer, Bill Williams, and then the other guy was the other team was POAH, which Preservation of Housing, something or other. And they've been in the affordable housing business for years. Bill was much more interested in the for sale housing, and he also, being younger and coming at it, not as an affordable housing developer, but as a citizen who was like proud of his heritage and who he was, and basically said, well, why can't we have it sort of bolder and stronger and better? And that was why that team, I think, won because he was more willing to take a risk with how he went about doing the project. And why I say that is because you're asking about why do a competition? Because you want to bring out developers like that. Architects are at the end of the food chain. It's the developers that have the imagination that will drive it. What you want to do is get those developers hooked up with architects who can make their vision happen, who aren't codependent on, well, you're not going to be able to do this because of this. So that's where a competition is good. But you have to build the trust first in the community, and that's probably the key step. But then I recommend it. We had a lot of fun. I wish these competitions paid more and were more certain about outcome, but I think they are good for breathing new life into innovative strategies for taking on development. Yes, Mr. Betsky. Aaron and I are old friends, so I'm worrying about this question. Yes?
Yeah, I am going to bring up in the history of it. First of all, just a mild criticism.
Thank you.
It's not all bad.
Huh?
I mean, you forgot
To mention the Griffith housing in the residential
range and the
architecture school just a block away
from this, the native
from the architecture
Yes.
school, where I think you were also looking at
the columns.
Yeah.
So there's good
stuff in Melbourne.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I didn't, hold on, no, Melbourne has incredible
No, but
architecture.
you dissed the whole campus. You said the campus was.
Oh, no, I meant, if you were a student, when I was a student,
Okay.
that's what I meant.
All right.
Yes.
So
This is a bit of a historical question.
Yes.
When you first started your practice, you started by being your own developer, making your own opportunities, seeing architecture as something that you constructed and developed out of your own initiative. And then you developed a very strong part of the practice, as I knew, that especially in the figure of Hank Koning, challenged every single code and regulation and tried to install your art. Yourself turning, see, developing your own building, or could you ever see yourself to hinted at in your last book, beginning to propose different modes of regulations and zoning that the work already implies?
Okay, so the issue of being a developer, we're not self-disciplined enough. We would lose so much money because we won't let it go until we know it's going to get there. So we understood that we need the team effort of the voices in the room. Now, the way our office works, and you've hit on it, Brian particularly and Hank are the pragmatists in our office. There's just no doubt about it. And they're always saying, no, you can't do this, or whatever it is. And then Nathan and I are on the other side. It's like, well, why can't we do this? And then you go home and you think, God, I'm so tired of listening to this stuff where you can't do this and you can't do that. And then the next day, the guys on the other team have come back with a better idea about how you can accomplish what it was, the formalists set out to do. So that pull and push is internal anyway in the architecture practice. Regulations, to a certain extent, you have to stop fighting them and you have to outsmart them. And that's, I think, where we've got to. It's like, I'm not going to fight that. That's pointless. Now, stupid application of code, we have to fight. Otherwise, we don't get those 3 trees. Or we can't, we couldn't have added to the building that you were talking about, the Paul Williams building, in the way that we did, that the historic people loved, but wouldn't approve in terms of state funding for it. So after a while, there's some things you have to fight, but you have to choose the battles that are productive. And you have to just outsmart it. Yeah.
Sometimes they actually ask your opinion when they're adjusting these things.
Yeah.
You get calls from,
Oh, regulations, yes, yeah.
Take a look at what they're writing and to kind of vet it for a process, a practical lens.
And I don't know if you're following California. There's a lot of it's all up in the air because of the change in the state regulations, because the communities would not change fast enough to allow for density. And the state came in with a regulation which bumped up building heights very dramatically in any multifamily zone. And this has really thrown everybody over the edge. And so there are a lot more aggressive community meetings than we've been to in a long while. So it's interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Pleasure.